Ever since I first heard about the idea of rail trails, I was really fascinated. I thought, what a great idea that you could actually get on your bike and ride without having to worry about being on the street, having to be in traffic. I think I was a little kid at the time. And over the years, I found myself riding on many of these rail trails and have fallen in love with so many of them. And I thought to put together a little video about, what I think are the top rail trails in the country. So this is a list of, in my opinion, the top rail trails in the United States. I should say that although this is a list of rail trails, I did include canal trails in there as well, since from a cycling perspective, they're essentially the same thing. But before we move ahead with this top 10 list, if you do enjoy this video, or if you've enjoyed any of our epic and not so epic adventures, please go ahead and subscribe. When you subscribe or share or like or comment, it helps get our channel out to more people. So without further ado, let's go ahead with the top 10 list of rail trails in the United States. Starting with number 10, the Route of the Hiawatha. Now most of these trails on this list are much longer trails, and the Route of the Hiawatha is not that at all. It's only 15 miles long, but what it lacks in length, it makes up for in a lot of other ways. Located at the Montana-Idaho state line, high in the Bitterroot Mountains, it's easily one of the most scenic trails in the entire United States. Throughout the length of this smooth, hard-packed trail, you're witness to a fascinating railroad history, with 7 awe-inspiring trestles and 10 tunnels. The longest is 1.6 miles long. It was originally part of the Milwaukee Road, a rail line that stretched from Milwaukee to Seattle, and also forms the route of the Palouse to Cascades Trail in Washington. The trail can be ridden as an out and back, or you can ride the 15 miles downhill and take a shuttle back. But it's no free ride. Passes start at $12 for kids, and it can be high as $40 for adults who opt for the shuttle ride back up to the trailhead. I prefer skipping the shuttle and just riding back, but either way you're gonna pay. There is a charge for using the trail. Still, trust me, it's worth it. This trail is an absolute gem. Now you can lengthen your ride to the west along a quiet forest road that will take you eventually to the Trail of the Coeur Lanes. Or you can extend it to the east along the Route of the Olympians. But if you take that extension, when we did this on our cross-country route, we found it to be a rocky slog for the most part. Hopefully there's plans to improve that. But the Route of the Hiawatha is fabulous in and of itself. So then at number 9, the Trail of the Coeur Lanes. Just adjacent to the Route of the Hiawatha, this route comes close to spanning the entire width of Idaho, with endpoints at Plummer to the west and Mullen to the east. In between are 72 miles of essentially flat, pure rail trail bliss. In the west, the trail for a time follows the beautiful shores of Chocolate Lake, a southern arm of the Lake Coeur d'Alene, with a bridge that spans the width of the lake in dramatic fashion. The town of Harrison along the way is a lovely stop with a great lakeside campground. From there, the trail heads into the hills and forests of Idaho. It's not unlikely that you'll see moose along here, as the trail skirts beautiful bogs and waterways adorned with lily pads. There's also bear, but no grizzlies, elk, wolves, even cougars. And for a different kind of wildlife, check out the Snake Pit, a 140-year-old restaurant, bar, and local institution just off the trail. As you make your way east, you'll ride through mining country. The old silver mining town of Wallace is a beautiful stop with loads of history and a gorgeous setting high in the Bitterroots. From there, it's only a few miles to Mullen and the terminus of the trail, but if one's adventurous, you can follow the somewhat rougher Norpack Trail over the Bitterroot Divide and into Montana. An exciting option is the Bitterroot 300K, which combines the Trail of the Coeur d'Alenes with the Route of the Hiawatha and other trails and routes to form a nearly 200-mile, multi-day loop through outstanding Idaho scenery. Now, one of the things that makes these trails special is that they provide a glimpse into a one-of-a-kind American landscape. The George Mickelson Trail at number 8 is a great example. At 109 miles long, this trail follows the spine of the unique geological feature known as the Black Hills of South Dakota. It's worth noting that this trail is a bit steeper than your average rail trail, where most rail trails don't exceed 2% grades. The Mickelson has some sustained climbs that reach 4%, making it a bit harder than most. But the wild western scenery here certainly makes it worth the effort. With over 100 bridge crossings and 4 tunnels, the railroad history here is alive and well. It begins to the north, in the old west town of Deadwood, famous as a TV show and now a lively gambling mecca. The trail leads you along a crushed stone surface through the beautiful Black Hills, through Hill City, Custer, and finishing up at Edgemont, where the hills meet the high plains. Along the way, you can see the dramatic Crazy Horse Memorial, and with a bit of extra effort, capture views of Mount Rushmore and even ride to Wind Cave National Park. All in all, it's a great way to spend a few days exploring one of America's unique western landscapes. Still in the west, and coming in at number 7, is the Olympic Discovery Trail. This would be higher on the list, except that it's still very much a work in progress. The trail traverses the width of the Olympic Peninsula in Washington State, another unique American region, with a tall mountain range in the center of the peninsula, creating, to the west, the U.S.'s wettest temperate rainforest. When finished, the ODT will cover 138 miles from the Pacific coast all the way to the Puget Sound. At this time, only about 90 miles are complete. The trail is planned to begin in La Push on the Pacific coast, where the Rails to Trails Great American Rail Trail begins. Indeed, this trail is the westernmost section of the Great American Rail Trail. However, today the trail starts just north of Forks, about 30 miles inland. And a few other unfinished sections will mean cyclists will have to be on quiet and little-used roads for some of the route. And while this can be a concern for some people, these roads are often as quiet as rail trails and provide lovely vistas in their own right. Some of the highlights include beautiful Lake Crescent, the bluest lake you will ever see, and an amazing stretch just east of Port Angeles that leads you along the Salish Sea. Trail towns include Forks, which is home to the Twilight Sagas, Port Angeles, Port Townsend, a beautiful town in its own right, and Sequim. In between are gorgeous seacoasts, mountain views, quaint farmlands, and those lush forests. The trail is built on several different rail routes. Mostly they were used for timber hauling. And you'll find historic bridges and tunnels all along the way. The trail surface varies between crushed stone and pavement, although none of it's rough. Despite the unfinished business, it's hard to find a more scenic and interesting rail trail than the Olympic Discovery Trail. Next, at number 6, is a combo platter, the Katy Trail and the Rock Island Trail in Missouri. Beginning just outside of Kansas City at Arrowhead Stadium, the Rock Island Spur spans 60 miles to join the better-known Katy Trail in Windsor, which then extends the rest of the width of Missouri, terminating near St. Louis and forming what is close to a true end-to-end state trail spanning 295 miles. Along its length, it's composed of crushed limestone, a smooth and comfortable ride, and I've spoken with road cyclists who found it to be completely rideable on thin tires. The Rock Island Spur, when we rode it, was a bit rougher and looser, but still no problem. This deserves a place on the list not only because it's so long, but also because of its outstanding beauty. Following along this trail means weaving in and out of prairie in the west, lowland forest in the east, past farmland along the mighty Missouri River, beneath steep bluffs and through beautiful and historic towns like Pleasant Hill, Herman, Sedalia, Boonville, and St. Charles. Short spurs connect the college city of Columbia and the state capital Jefferson City, both worth a visit. Summers can be hot and humid, as we found out, but still really spectacular. A lot of history can be found here as well, as it follows the original route of Lewis and Clark, as well as the descendants of Daniel Boone as they settled the West. Future plans call for the Rock Island Trail to be extended from where it meets the Katy in Windsor all the way to Washington, forming a 400-mile loop that will be the envy of the nation. Without a doubt, the Katy Trail Network is a bucket list-worthy route for anyone seeking to explore the quieter side of America. Okay, for the 5th trail on our list, we're traveling back to the beautiful state of Washington. The Palouse to Cascades Trail is actually a couple of trails linked together to form one. The John Wayne Trail, which crossed the eastern desert side of the state of Washington, and the Iron Horse Trail, which crossed the Cascades in the wetter western half. Together they form a 285-mile-long, hard-packed gravel route that crosses most of the state and is one of the longest rail trails in the country. Starting just east of Seattle, this beauty goes through the thick Pacific Northwest lush forests before climbing gradually to the Snoqualmie Tunnel, a 2.3-mile tunnel that crosses the Cascades Divide. One of the exciting aspects of this trail is the sudden change of climate that you experience. You begin in spruce forests, but as soon as you cross into the eastern side of the tunnel, everything changes. By the time you reach Ellensburg, you're in a dramatically different climate, and the rest of the way is rough, dry, empty, and challenging. At least so I've heard. We only rode the trail to Cle Elum. The bridges and tunnels are a real attraction, and besides the Snoqualmie Tunnel, there are numerous other tunnels, and the newly renovated Beverly Bridge is a true classic, making a dramatic crossing over the wide Columbia. We rode the western half on our ride across the United States and found it exceptional, with a lot of history and stunning flora and wide views over the misty mountains of the Cascades. Reports I've heard is that the eastern half is still very rugged, and with few towns, one has to do their research before wandering off on this trek. But I've also heard that it's exceptionally beautiful if you love that dry, wide open range kind of thing. Coming in at number 4 is the Northern Rail Trail. Now this one doesn't really make a lot of top 10 lists, and I really can't fathom why. We rode this at the end of October, which isn't really the prime time, but we found it to be really an incredible trail, rising up from the Connecticut River at the Vermont border, going over the White Mountains of New Hampshire all the way to Concord, the state capital. At just 59 miles, it's hardly a long ride, but to be able to ride through these elegant New England landscapes makes it all worth it. Riding past the serene New Hampshire lakes is reminiscent of reading Thoreau, and the bogs and marshes along the way are dreamy and enchanting. All along, one is reminded of the special beauty of New England, with covered bridges, sweet little trailside towns with general stores, and miles of grand, forested, hilly nature. Old railroad cuts through granite remind the rider why this state is nicknamed the Granite State, and there are plans to make it part of the future Granite State Rail Trail, which would cross the state from White River Junction, Vermont, to Salem at the Massachusetts border. The Northern Rail Trail is an excellent way to get a taste of the soft and beautiful landscapes of New England. Moving right along, we have a trail that's not a rail trail at all, the Erie Canal Trail, making my 3rd spot for the top 10 rail trails. At 365 miles long, it's easily one of the longest cycling trails on the continent, although like many of the others, it's still a work in progress, with 75 to 85% of it fully off-road, and every year sees a little bit more work completed. On our ride, we found the on-road sections to be pleasant diversions and rarely challenging or dangerous. And yes, technically it's not a rail trail, but it's still an abandoned transportation corridor, repurposed for our riding enjoyment. And its history goes back further than rail trails to before the time when railroads were king. The trail towns and the canal infrastructure along the way harken back to the very early days of our country, during a time when canals were the way that commerce was moved. The canal itself is still in use, but has been redirected in places, and the trail for the most part follows the old canal route. And where the old canal still operates, you have the fortune of riding through charming and historic towns that sprung up when the canal was built in the early 1800s. Towns like Albion, Brockport, Medina, and Lockport, which is home to a fabulous canal museum and some of the most interesting engineering works of the day. Surfaces as varied as the trail itself, sometimes paved, sometimes packed dirt, but always rideable. Along its length, it brings the bicycle tourist to older and interesting cities like Buffalo, Syracuse, and Albany, as well as miles and miles of upstate New York scenery. And most of us love rail trails for 3 reasons: beautiful scenery, interesting history, and safe off-road cycling. On that score, the Erie Canal delivers in a big, big way. So that brings us down to the top 2. The criteria here is pretty challenging. For me to rate a trail this high, it has to be incredibly scenic, with a lot of variety, with a lot of history, and enough distance so that you feel like you're really going somewhere when you're riding it. The Ohio to Erie Trail is all that and more. From Cincinnati to Cleveland, you traverse an entire state, from a historic river that was key to opening up the American frontier to one of our lovely Great Lakes. In the south, along the Ohio Valley, you feel like you're almost in Dixie, with Kentucky just across the river. And by the time you reach Cleveland, you're smack dab in the heart of the Rust Belt. Along the way, you travel through Columbus and Akron, as well as numerous smaller towns, and through miles and miles of really incredible scenery. The individual trails that make up this trail system help make each part feel unique to itself. From Cincinnati northward, a series of small trails leads you to the 78-mile-long Little Miami Scenic Trail, a trail that's commonly rated as one of the best rail trails in the country just on its own, with glimpses of the slow-moving river and lovely trail towns all along its length, and a series of other named trails, for the most part linked seamlessly, with historic and scenic highlights throughout. The Holmes County Trail takes you through the heart of America's largest Amish region. You pass through Massillon, where American football ostensibly got its start. And the final leg is on the Ohio and Erie Canal Towpath Trail, a National Historic Park. Here you'll find lots of wildlife, but also old artifacts from the time when Ohio was helping to lead the Industrial Revolution in America, thanks to the creation of this very canal. Now, this 326-mile route is still very much in the works, with 270 of those currently off-road. We found very few issues when we had to connect on roads, and we rode through some of the most beautiful scenery of our cross-country trip along these roads. All across the state, Ohio has done a great job repurposing its old rail and canal systems into trails, and the Ohio to Erie Trail is the crown jewel. So that brings us to number 1, the Great Allegheny Passage and the C&O Canal. 2 different trails, but connected to form one continuous route. It gets my vote for the best rail trail in America. So what makes this route so excellent? Well, for starters, it's a long one at 333 miles, making it, I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, the longest off-road route of its kind in the country. Mountain bike trails, like the Great Divide Trail, seem to belong to a different category. It also makes a crossing over the Appalachian mountain range, giving you a feeling of doing something really special, as well as taking you through a diverse range of ecosystems and landscapes. And the history is alive here as well, starting in Pittsburgh, one of America's major industrial centers, known as the Steel City. It was once called Hell with the Lid Off due to its plethora of steel mills and thick, smoky air. Today, there are no more steel mills left, and the city is now known as the City of Bridges. There are 446 of them in the city, and it's now rehabilitated into a steampunk paradise. As you travel east, you pass through one charming town after another, each with its own unique character. In Cumberland, you join with the Chesapeake and Ohio Canal, surveyed by a young George Washington, and only completed after his death. Today, the route is lined with old lock houses, 7 of which you can stay in, where the lock keepers lived. The route is full of old artifacts, beautiful aqueducts and tunnels, and of course, old canal towns. Now west of Cumberland on the Gap, the trail is all on old rail beds, and the surface, while unpaved, is excellent. But once you're on the C&O Canal, all bets are off. Even though it's a national park, the trail has not been improved, and you are now riding on a dirt mule path. It's very rideable, unless you happen to catch it after a rain, and then it can be a muddy slog. The trail drops you off in the middle of Washington, D.C., a fascinating and overall excellent place to finish your ride. And there's even a train service between the 2 endpoints, and Amtrak allows you to roll on your bike along this route, making the trip easy for travelers. If you haven't ridden this most amazing of American trails, then you need to bump it up on your bucket list. The Gap and C&O route is a model for the country to aspire to, full of history, scenery, and beautiful riding. So there you have it, folks, my top 10 list for America's rail trails. Yes, choosing was hard. Honorable mentions include the Elroy Sparta Trail in Wisconsin, the Root River Trail in Minnesota. Both gorgeous trails in an absolutely gorgeous part of the country. And also here in Colorado, I'd have to give a nod to not only the Rio Grande Trail from Aspen to Glenwood Springs, but the Boreas Pass Trail as well. Even though that allows cars, they do go very, very slowly, and you get to ride over the Continental Divide, which is a very cool thing to do. I think the Wabash Trace in Iowa is awesome, the Delaware and Hudson in Vermont, and let's not forget the short but beyond incredible Highline Trail in New York City. But you say, what about the Paul Bunyan State Trail or the Sioux Line in Minnesota? The Illinois Prairie Path, which is considered to be the first rail trail going way back to the 60s. Or how about the Cardinal Greenway of Indiana, the Cal Haven in Michigan, or the Raccoon River Valley Trail in Iowa? Further east, what about the Greenbrier River Trail or the Virginia Creeper Trail in Virginia, the New River Trail that they just made a national park around in West Virginia? And what about other New England trails? How about the Island Rail Trail and the New Lemuel, is that how you pronounce it, Trail in Vermont? Or the Cape Cod Rail Trail in Massachusetts? And what about the South? What about the Silver Comet Chief Ladiga Trail in Georgia and Alabama? How about Florida's Withlacoochee Trail? The Overseas Heritage Trail, which follows the Florida Keys. What about them? I haven't ridden them. That's why they're not on the list. In this way I can come back and create another video down the road from all the experiences that I haven't had yet on all these trails. And there's so many trails, so little time, right? So let's all look forward to many great cycling experiences to come. And also, let's just take a moment to appreciate the efforts that so many volunteers have given to make these trails a reality. For us bicycle tourists, these rail trails are like national parks, true gems, each bucket list worthy. And each of these took a lot of blood, sweat, and tears to become a reality. Great job, Rails to Trails Conservancy, and great job to all those who donate their time and emotional capital doing the hard work and giving us all a beautiful trail on which to ride. If you're interested in getting any more information on any of these rail trails, I've included links in the description. And of course, if you feel like there's any that I've missed, or you want to share your thoughts about what are some of the greatest rail trails you've ever ridden on, go ahead and leave a comment. We'd love to hear from you. Oh, and if you're interested in our ride across the United States and all the rail trails that we rode on, make sure and check them out, starting with this one right here. And one more time, don't forget to subscribe. Thank you, and happy trails.